The man who would orchestrate the largest mass murder-suicide in modern history began by building a rainbow. His name was Jim Jones, and in the deeply segregated landscape of 1950s Indiana, he did something so radical it felt like a miracle. He built a church where black families and white families didn't just worship together, they ate together, lived together, and called each other family. They were the People's Temple, a vibrant interracial arc in a sea of American hate. He sold them a vision of a new world, a paradise, and for a while it felt real. Jones wasn't just a preacher in a pulpit, he was a revolutionary in the streets. He opened soup kitchens that fed the hungry when the government wouldn't. He ran nursing homes that treated the elderly with a dignity they'd never known. He stared down slumlords and crooked politicians. When he spoke, his voice, a mesmerizing blend of Pentecostal fire and Marxist fury, made you believe. He saw the lonely, the disenfranchised, the ones chewed up and spit out by the American dream, and he told them, "You are beautiful. You are loved. You belong." For thousands, it was the first time they'd ever heard those words. But here's what they didn't see, not at first. The love had a price. The miracles had a method. The healings were cheap magic tricks. Trusted aides would interview sick newcomers in the lobby, then feed Jones their ailments through an earpiece. He'd divine their cancer, then have a loyalist spit up a bloody chicken gizzard he'd palmed earlier, declaring the tumor vanquished. The crowd would erupt. Faith was manufactured and then harvested. Belonging required absolute surrender. It started small. Give a little more of your weekly paycheck to the cause. Then hand over the whole check. Sign over your house, your car, your Social Security. Soon, he was asking for more. He implemented catharsis hessians, brutal public forums where members were forced to confess their sins, real or imagined. A thought of disloyalty, a flicker of doubt, a secret desire for a candy bar. The crowd, your friends, your family would scream at you, dissect you, humiliate you until you were a sobbing, broken shell, thanking Father for saving your soul. It wasn't therapy. It was psychological demolition. He wasn't building a community. He was building a cult of personality. An army of dependents who couldn't imagine a life without him. Then, the cracks began to show on the outside. In 1977, New West magazine published an expose, a devastating account from defectors who described beatings, financial corruption, and the staged healings. The carefully constructed image of a benevolent humanitarian began to crumble. The questions from the media grew louder, more pointed. The world was coming for his kingdom. So Jones played his final, ultimate card. He sold them one last dream, an escape, an exodus from the corruption and bigotry of Babylon, the United States. He had found a place, a remote tract of jungle in the small South American nation of Guyana, a socialist cooperative where no one could touch them. There, they would build their utopia from scratch. They would be the architects of a new Eden. A young woman named Sarah, who had joined the temple in San Francisco, seeking a cause greater than herself, packed her single suitcase. She wrote a final letter to her estranged parents, telling them she had found true purpose, a true family. "We are going to build a paradise on earth," she wrote, her hand trembling with excitement. "Don't worry about me. I am finally free." Over 1,000 people like her liquidated their lives. They boarded planes bound for the equator, their hearts filled with a desperate, burning hope. They believed they were flying towards a new beginning. They didn't know they were flying into a meticulously constructed end, a place where their leader's paranoia would finally consume them all. What happens when an outcast gets his hands on chaos, then convinces 1,000 people to follow him into the dark? The first breath of air in Jonestown was a lie. It was hot, wet, and heavy, thick with the alien scent of jungle rot and the buzzing of a million unseen insects. This was not the paradise from the glossy brochures. This was a sprawling, muddy wound carved into the face of the earth, a 3,800-acre prison camp disguised as a promised land. The work was a new form of slavery, sanctified by their savior. 12 hours a day, 6.5 days a week, under a sun that felt like a physical weight. They hacked at the relentless jungle with machetes, their hands blistering and bleeding. They planted crops in acidic clay soil that yielded almost nothing. Hunger became a constant, gnawing presence. The diet was a monotonous rotation of rice, beans, and sometimes a watery gravy. People grew gaunt, their eyes hollow. Weevils in the rice were just extra protein. Meanwhile, Jones and his inner circle ate fried chicken and drank sodas in his private cottage. But the physical deprivation was nothing compared to the psychological siege. Jones's voice was God. It was everywhere, blasting from loudspeakers strung up on every hut, every lamppost, every corner of the settlement. From sunup to sundown and deep into the night, his voice followed them, a constant stream of sermons, news readings, heavily edited to stoke fear, and paranoid rants. He was their phantom in their ears, whispering of the apocalypse just beyond the trees. The CIA, he'd rave, was the blue-eyed monster, sending agents to infiltrate and destroy them. Their families back home were not loving relatives. They were capitalist pigs plotting to kidnap them and drag them back to Babylon. The world wasn't just dangerous, it was actively hunting them. He was their shield, their protector, their father. And a father has the right to test his children. Thus began the White Nights. The first time the siren wailed across the settlement in the dead of night, it caused pure panic. Everyone, from toddlers to octogenarians, was herded into the central pavilion. Armed guards, Jones's personal security force, known as the Red Brigade, sealed the perimeter. No one was leaving. Jones mounted the stage, his face slick with sweat, his eyes wide and unfocused from a cocktail of amphetamines and barbiturates. He screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking. "The moment we have feared is upon us. The mercenaries are in the jungle. They're coming to destroy us, to torture our children. We will not let them. We will die with dignity. We will meet in another place." This was the revolutionary suicide he had preached about for years, a final, glorious act of defiance. Trays of red liquid were passed through the terrified crowd. He told them it was poison. "The time has come to drink," he commanded. "Show your loyalty. Show your faith." People wept openly. Mothers clutched their children. Sarah, the young idealist, felt a cold dread wash over her. This wasn't the beautiful struggle she had signed up for. This was madness. She saw a mother next to her force the paper cup to her crying son's lips. She saw men, strong men she had worked alongside, drink without question, their faces streaked with tears. And then, after an agonizing 45 minutes of terror, Jones began to laugh. A deep, chilling laugh that echoed through the pavilion. "Congratulations," he sneered. "It was a test, a loyalty test. You have proven you are ready." The relief was so profound it made people vomit. They had stared into the abyss and their god had pulled them back. But he hadn't saved them. He had only shown them how deep the abyss was and how easily he could push them in. He was rehearsing their murder, and they were his willing cast. With each new white knight, the resistance weakened. The psychological whiplash was too much. But one night, a thoughtful, quiet woman named Christine Miller, a former legal secretary, found her voice. "I see the children, and I think they deserve to live," she said, her words clear and steady despite the shaking in her hands. The crowd, conditioned now, turned on her instantly. "Traitor! Coward! You don't trust Father!" Jones let them scream at her for a moment, a conductor enjoying his orchestra of hate. Then he silenced them with a wave of his hand. He let her live. He knew her dissent was a valuable tool. It allowed him to identify the weak links. He stood over the bodies of his exhausted, traumatized followers who now cheered their own mock executions. He realized his victory was complete. It wasn't just loyalty he commanded now. It tasted like ownership. The de Havilland Twin Otter airplane descended from the clouds on November 17, 1978. A metal bird of prey interrupting the suffocating green canopy. On board was Leo Ryan, a determined U.S. congressman from California. He wasn't a crusader, just a politician doing his job. He'd been inundated with letters from frantic families, the concerned relatives, who claimed their loved ones were being held in Jonestown against their will. With him were several journalists and some of the relatives themselves, a delegation of the outside world Jones had taught his followers to despise. They came, seeking the truth. Jones, the ultimate showman, knew this was his final performance. He orchestrated a Potemkin paradise. The moment the delegation arrived, the settlement exploded into a bizarre, feverish festival. A band played upbeat soul music. People danced with manic energy, their faces plastered with wide, brittle smiles. They hugged the visitors, telling them with desperate conviction how happy they were, how they had found their heaven on earth. For dinner, they were served a feast of beef and greens, a meal the residents hadn't seen in months. It was a flawless, terrifying illusion. Ryan was almost convinced. He saw a functioning community, people working together, a dream taking shape. But fear is a liquid. It seeps through the cracks. As NBC correspondent Don Harris walked through the dancing crowd, a young man pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand so quickly he almost missed it. Later, Harris opened it. The note read, "Al Simon and his family, please help us get out of Jonestown." The dam broke. Quietly, secretly, one by one, others came forward. A woman approached a reporter by the piggery, whispering, "We're in hell. Get us out." Another slipped a note to an embassy official. By the end of the day, 16 people had risked everything to plead for their lives. The perfect utopia was a lie. The happy family was a hostage situation. When Ryan presented the list of defectors to Jones, the charismatic mask disintegrated. His face, puffy from drug use, contorted into a mask of pure venomous rage. betrayal, the ultimate sin. In his perfect world, his children wanted to leave him. He feigned a sad resignation. "Anyone who wants to leave can leave," he said, his voice a low hiss. "This has always been a place of free choice." The next afternoon, the defectors, along with Ryan's party, crowded onto a large dump truck for the tense 6-mile journey to the Port Kaituma airstrip. The air was thick with unspoken menace. As they began boarding 2 small planes, a farm tractor towing a long flatbed trailer rumbled onto the runway. It seemed innocent enough. Then, several men jumped off the trailer. They were not farmers. They were Jones' Red Brigade, and they were armed with shotguns and automatic rifles. Time seemed to warp and stretch. A man pretending to be a defector, Larry Layton, opened fire from inside one of the planes. Simultaneously, the men from the trailer raised their weapons. The world dissolved into a cacophony of gunfire, screams, and the sickening thud of bullets hitting flesh. Congressman Ryan was riddled with bullets, falling beside the plane's wheel. Don Harris, the NBC newsman, was executed at point-blank range as he tried to film the attack. A photographer kept snapping pictures until a shotgun blast tore him apart. The escape had become a slaughter. The bridge to the outside world was not just burned, it was blown to smithereens, and Jones himself had lit the fuse. Back in the pavilion, the sirens began to wail their final terrible song. It was another white night, but this time there were no rehearsals, no tests. The vat was brought to the center of the pavilion, filled with a sickening purple brew, grape flavorade, laced with a lethal cocktail of potassium cyanide, Valium, and chloral hydrate. Dr. Larry Schacht, the camp's physician, who had once sworn an oath to do no harm, was the one who mixed it. The armed guards, their faces grim and unreadable, formed a tight circle around the pavilion. There would be no more debates. There would be no escape. They had once called him their savior. He knew that to complete his masterpiece, he had to become the monster they never saw coming. The first sound on the infamous death tape, a 44-minute cassette recording of the final hour, is the crying of children. It is a sound that will never leave the minds of those who have heard it. Jones's voice, calm and hypnotic, cuts through the terror. "The babies first," he orders. Mothers, their faces streaked with tears, lined up. They took syringes filled with the purple poison and squirted the liquid down their own infants' throats. You can hear them on the tape, choking, convulsing, then falling silent, one by one. The children were next, then the adults. Die with respect. Die with a degree of dignity. Jones coached them from his wicker throne, his voice a grotesque parody of a loving father. It's not to be feared. It's just a transition. In the middle of the horror, a single voice of reason rose one last time. Christine Miller, the woman who had dared to question him during the rehearsals, pleaded for their lives. "Is it too late for Russia?" she asked, referencing a long-discussed plan to emigrate. "I think the children deserve to live." Jones's response was swift and brutal. "I'm not talking to you. You've been a traitor for a long time." The crowd, his loyalists, shouted her down, their voices a chorus of doom. "We're going to meet on the other side," someone yelled. Christine's voice was swallowed by the collective madness. It was not a peaceful drift into sleep. Cyanide poisoning is a vicious, agonizing death. It feels like fire ripping through your stomach as your cells suffocate. People convulsed, foamed at the mouth, and clawed at their own throats before collapsing. Armed guards stood over the vat, their rifles ensuring that anyone who hesitated would be forced to drink or shot. They walked among the dying, pressing cups into the hands of the wavering. It was an assembly line of death. Sarah, the young idealist, found herself in line. She saw the bodies of her friends, the people she had called her family, piling up around the pavilion. The dream of paradise had rotted from the inside out, and this was the final putrid fruit. There was no escape. She closed her eyes, drank the bitter liquid, and fell among the others. In less than an hour, it was over. The jungle floor was a carpet of the dead, a horrifying mosaic of over 900 bodies, lying arm in arm. A third of them were children. When the cacophony of death finally subsided, Jones picked up a .357 Magnum. He didn't drink the poison he had served his flock. He sat in his chair, surrounded by the silence of his creation, and was shot in the head. Days later, when Guyanese troops hacked their way into the silent settlement, the stench hit them from a quarter-mile away. It was the smell of a city of the dead. They found a world frozen in its final moment of madness. Bodies lay in neat, ordered rows around the pavilion. Half-eaten plates of food sat on tables. A child's tricycle was toppled over in the mud. Over the pavilion, a hand-painted sign still proclaimed Jones's mantra: "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it." The world remembers the event with a glib, dismissive phrase, "Don't drink the Kool-Aid." But that catchphrase is a profound injustice. It implies they were all fools who willingly followed a madman to their deaths. The truth is far more complex and far more terrifying. They weren't just drinking a beverage. They were swallowing a dream of a world without racism, without poverty, without loneliness, a dream that had been systematically curdled into a nightmare. The real poison wasn't just the cyanide. It was the hope that was turned into a weapon, the faith that was twisted into a shackle. He promised them a place where they would finally be seen. He delivered them to a place where they would never be heard from again. Jim Jones didn't just break a promise. He broke reality itself.